Hello, and welcome to Joe and Kat Chats. Oh my goodness. So today we're talking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is part 2 of the series. Last week we spoke about Articles 1 through 15 of this Declaration of Human Rights. So today we're going to talk about 16 through 30. And we're recording live. Today is April 6th, 2021. We're on Facebook and YouTube at /JoeNiceDJ. And find us on all socials at Joe and Kat Chats, or on our personal pages at JoeNiceDJ or at CatWells22. We're also happy to be part of Tastemakers Radio on Dash Radio. So listen to us every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern there. And of course, I'm always excited to be back and chatting with Joe. So how are you, Joe?
You know what? I'm doing the best I can with what I've got. I'm giving it the best that I've got. And I'm looking forward to another robust and ripe conversation with my co-host with the most on the other coast. Amazing how that works out. Amazing how that works out. Other than that, I'm good. It's bad enough that we have an airborne virus out here, otherwise known as coronavirus. But I don't know about where you are in Vancouver, but my gosh, the pollen here where I am right now, it's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. It's as if Mother Nature just decided to just dump out just mustard seed everywhere, and everything is a nice shade of yellow. So yeah, so in addition to being indoors because of the pandemic, it's another good reason to be indoors if you have allergies. So again, to everybody out here, please stay safe, stay hydrated, stay moisturized if you need to, because it's a real thing out here.
Yeah, for sure. I'm well. I'm grateful that I don't actually suffer from allergies from the environment. So, but I know a lot of people do, and it is getting bad with the pollen. And so, yeah, so I do also encourage everyone to stay indoors if you need to. And as far as the pandemic, we are experiencing, the third wave in Canada, almost the fourth wave in the United States of America of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I just want to also remind everyone that we understand, we're empathetic toward how life has changed so drastically in the last year. But I just want to encourage everyone to not only stay indoors as much as you can. I mean, of course, you need that sunshine to get the vitamin D to keep yourself healthy. But I want to encourage everyone to continue to physically distance, to wash your hands very frequently. Please wear a mask if you do go outside and or are doing any errands or anywhere near other people, whether you've been vaccinated or not. A mask is still necessary. So yeah, otherwise I'm really good.
Excellent. And something I want to piggyback off of what you said a couple of seconds ago, Ms. Wells. For those of us or those of you watching or listening that have been following the Joe and Kat Chat series for the better part of now 43 or 44 weeks, we've done episodes about medical apartheid. We've done episodes about vaccines. If you want to listen to those to educate yourself more about vaccines and medical apartheid, or the healthcare systems of the United States and Canada, or anything that we've talked about involving healthcare, the pandemic, or anything that we've talked about over this past 43 or 44 weeks, follow us on all of our social media pages. We are here, and we are here for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like we say it after every episode, we do these because we care about each and every one of you. And so we want everyone to stay safe. It is trying and taxing to be, more than a year into a global pandemic. I mean, it's been said a million times before, it's unprecedented. And so we just have to continue to be diligent and stay as safe as we can and protect those around us who are more vulnerable than us. So yeah, so please do go take a listen or a watch to all of those episodes you mentioned, because yeah, they're definitely worth talking about.
Not only are they worth talking about, but if you're a teacher or a professor and you want to give a little insight to a particular topic that you're teaching, and you want to have somebody or someone or a couple of people talk about something that is relevant to your subject matter, give Joe and Cat Chats a listen. Download it. Play it in your classroom. Again, we did an entire episode about education, schools, and COVID-19. And like I said earlier, how do you control the room when the room is Zoom? A great way to control the room when the room is Zoom is to have Joe and Cat Chats in the background.
There you go. Yeah, we do try to educate with, the best information that is available. And we talk about all sorts of different things throughout. I mean, it's been 43, 44 episodes. So yeah, I mean, there's been a whole range of things that we've talked about. So yeah, again, happy to encourage everyone to go take a listen to what we have talked about or spoken about. And we're going to keep going because, we have a lot more to talk about.
Yes. Yeah. Like I said on my live last night that I did, and we're going to jump into everything in the next minute or so. We got a couple of episodes that we want to share with everybody in the future. Next week's episode is going to be about Black athletes and cultural influence. The week after that is going to be a crossover episode with Stacey Marie. She does a show on the Tastemakers Radio channel on the Dash Radio Network called The Sanctuary, where she discusses harm reduction. So we're going to do a crossover episode with her about harm reduction. We already filmed an episode with her for her show, The Sanctuary, a couple of weeks ago. We filmed it. The video is ready to go. The audio sounds crisp and clean. So we're going to release that in the next 2 to 3 weeks or so. And we're going to get that on the move for everybody to hear and listen. So again, if you're involved in festivals, if you're involved in nightclubs, the nightlife, whatever, and you feel this is something that could be relevant or important for you to listen to, by all means, dig in, dissect, and absorb that episode. Let it sink in. The episode after that, episode number 46, is going to be housing and the unhoused. So we're going to talk about homelessness and being unhoused in the United States and Canada, some of the hot spots for homelessness or being unhoused around the United States. We're going to talk about the violence that we've seen in Toronto, your former city as well, and how the unhoused are being treated there. We're going to talk about the homeless situation in Vancouver, especially in Hastings Street, where you are, not on Hastings Street, but in Vancouver. Homeless problems in Echo Park in Los Angeles, Skid Row, and around various parts of the United States and Canada, quite honestly, the world. So we're going to talk about that for episode number 46. Episode number 47 is going to be the LGBTQ episode. We're going to talk about that. We're going to define what those letters mean in that acronym LGBTQIA+, etc. So we're going to describe all of that and talk about the LGBTQ movement in full and grand detail, because that is important. Episode number 48 is going to be the Islamophobia episode. We're going to talk about the religion of Islam, what it means to be Muslim, and why Islamophobia has taken hold in so many westernized nations. We've seen hijab bans in France most recently. We've seen hijab bans in Belgium and Switzerland. We're seeing the war on Muslims in the United States and Canada, and anti-Islam behaviors across the United States and Canada and other parts of North America. So we're going to talk about that. Episode number 49 will involve wealth inequality, and taxes. I'm reading a wonderful book right now by Professor Dorothy Brown called The Whiteness of Wealth. We're going to talk about that book. We're also going to reinvestigate wealth inequality. We did an entire episode on wealth inequality on the greatest podcast in the history of history, Joe and Cat Chats. We did that, I don't know, probably 40 weeks ago. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, that was last summer sometime.
It was in the summer. So we're coming. Yeah. So if you want to listen to that, by all means, get that going. Episode 50, we will have a special guest. We are still efforting this situation. We cannot let you all know who that special guest is, because if we let you know, it wouldn't be a secret anymore. So we're going to keep that under wraps in the back pocket for right now. But when we know, you will know. And when you know, It's going to be great. And then we're going to have a couple of other episodes coming up to episode 52, which will mean 1 year of Joe and Kat Chats.
Yeah.
And it's going to be live. It's going to be awesome with a capital A. We got a couple of messages in the chat right now. We'll get these in going. Just JC out of Calgary, Alberta, saying my seasonal allergies kick in the worst at the end of summer for some reason. That's interesting. My allergies are on fire right now, and I don't know why. And just JC saying, hey, bring up the housing first model. We absolutely will bring up the housing first model with regards to housing. Housing First is a housing program that was started in I think Helsinki, Finland, if I'm not mistaken, where the government located all the homeless people or the unhoused people and decided to give them houses. And it turned out that homelessness reduced by something like 80 to 90%. So in Salt Lake City, they also did the same thing, and homelessness dramatically reduced. And it just goes to show that if governments are willing to invest in infrastructure, moreover, people, as we like to call in the human resources industry, human capital, if you invest money into people, there's a really good chance you will get a high return on that investment. And that high return on investment is a more productive member of society. That high return on investment is a stronger community. That high return on investment is a tax base that will go to fund other programs that will also lead to reducing homelessness and the unhousing problem in the United States and Canada and other parts of the world. So the future is looking bright. I got to wear my sunglasses indoors. I got to wear them at night. That's how bright our future is.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Oh, sorry, the dog is barking. Just give me a sec.
Even Onus likes it. So that's what we're doing right now. Again, out to everybody we have in the chat. We're going to get everything going in the next minute or so with the Joe and Kat Chats episode. Again, we're going to talk about episode 43, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, part 2. And we are going to have a magnificent conversation about much of what we need to talk about today. And Kat is going to be joining us again shortly. And there she is. She is back.
Sorry about that. The dog is barking because my roommate just got home. But yeah, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to get all of those topics going. Of course, all of them are, close to my heart. We're going to, we talk about this stuff because we are passionate about social justice and, social inequalities, and we want a more just world around us. So our part in that is education and just discussing these topics that are so important to be discussing all the time. Yeah, so I guess as we get into today's topic, which is part 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we wanted to provide just a quick overview because last week we defined some terms as usual, and we just want to do a really quick refresher. Yep. So human rights is a right that is believed to belong justifiably to every person. Human rights define what we are all entitled to: a life of equality, dignity, respect, and a life free from discrimination.
Absolutely. Human rights are basically the rights that you get from the womb to the tomb. Human rights are rights and freedoms that everybody gets from birth until death. You get them simply for the basis of being a human being. So those are human rights. Now, a right is a legal, social, or ethical principle of entitlement. It's something that you feel you should have because you are either legally, socially, or ethically entitled to have that particular entitlement. Now, a civil right is a right that guarantees equal social opportunities for everybody based under the law, regardless of race, religion, gender affiliation, political affiliation, etc. So, as I said last week and maybe about 30 episodes ago, the difference between a human right and a civil right. A human right, you get it simply because you're a human being. A civil right, you get it because you are a member of a particular political state and or country.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So just to kind of go along with this, and now I'm thinking about this difference between human rights and civil rights in a bit more detail. The the United States, the Constitution of the United States, and really a lot of the movements that the United States have had, it's really been based on civil rights because we've used the law to enforce civil rights as a means to justify human rights. Whereas in Canada, there is a museum in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I've had the pleasure of visiting this museum. It's a wonderful museum, by the way. It's called the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, where it's in Winnipeg. And the Canadian Constitution is not necessarily focused more on civil rights, and it's focused on human rights, which might be a reason as to why, to a certain extent, Canada may not necessarily have the level of issues that the United States has. Because to a certain extent, Canada, to a certain extent, I'm saying that with a caveat, has tried to live up to the ideals of not only their constitution, but of human rights. Whereas in the United States, I don't think our legal system or the Constitution, for that matter, ever really focused on human rights. It's been more civil rights because it was more focused on legalities rather than a matter of morality and or principle.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I will have to say, like, it's not entirely true. Canada definitely has its issues. We've spoken about it a lot before. But yeah, I think the baseline of Canadian law and our rights and freedom, our Declaration of Rights and Freedoms, is totally based on the human rights framework rather than a civil rights one. So that is an interesting differentiation that you just made, because there are differences, and Canada is a more socialist country, with the biggest example being healthcare. We have universal healthcare, and the US does not. Mm-hmm. So that's a really interesting point you brought up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Every once in a while I try to bring up an interesting point, and it just happens to work out. So
it's all the time. Don't be fooled.
It's a magic thing. It's a magic thing. But, to kind of further the discussion, the reason why the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was created was from the United Nations. The United Nations was created in 1945, and the UN General Assembly announced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on December 10, 1948. One of the main architects of this document was Eleanor Roosevelt, and 50 other member nations signed onto this document. And there are 30 rights that include the right to asylum, free speech, and education, and different social, political, and civil rights, such as the pursuit of happiness, free speech, and privacy. And this document of 30 articles also includes socioeconomic rights like Social Security, which we'll talk about later today, healthcare, which we will certainly talk about today, and labor rights. There's an entire article devoted to just labor rights. So all 192 member states of the United Nations are involved with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we're going to go ahead and at this point begin to outline the remaining 15 articles that we have and provide examples as to how your country and my country consistently violate these articles, because they're an issue, it's a problem, and if people are going to sign on to this document and agree to this document, then they need to be upholding the principles that are part of these articles.
Yeah, and just as another quick reminder, we talked about this a little bit last week as well. This declaration was created and signed by many countries in 1948, and so there is an element of sort of Eurocentrism to this document that was, it was created in Europe for, the quote-unquote global north countries that were signing on to it at the time. So there is like the legacy of colonialism and imperialism throughout, but I think they still did a pretty good job of outlining, human rights in a general sense.
Sure.
So if anyone's
Sure.
interested, please go take a listen to last week, because we outlined it, Articles 1 through 15.
Hmm.
And today we are going to start with Article 16. And do you want to go ahead, Joe?
Sure. Article 16 talks about marriage and family. Essentially, you have the right to marry and you have the right to have a family when you're old enough to have a family. You cannot be forced into getting married. That's against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 16. The government has the right to protect you, the individual, and the family unit. And the Article 16 also states that you have the right to have a divorce. If you don't want to be married anymore, you don't have to be married.
Yeah, and one thing that stood out for me is Article 16 says people of full age, and they entered with free and full consent.
Mm,
So, I mean, just getting right into it, I mean, this made me think about how, child marriages happen all the time,
sure they do.
all throughout the world. It
Absolutely.
happens in Canada, it happens in the United States, it happens all over. And so that's a big thing that sort of comes to mind when I think about the right to marriage and, right to divorce and the exploitation or, I guess, violations of this human right that
Mhm.
folks have.
Right, right. And it is, when you talk about forced marriages, there are a lot of countries, especially in Africa, where marriage is forced. Even in the mid 1900s, there are plenty of forced marriages, not only in the indigenous, in the Native American community, but I think in the First Nations communities, where there were forced marriages in Canada. And in many instances, women were not allowed to get a divorce because marriage meant that you were with that person for forever. And and being in a forced marriage is it does violate the safety of women, which is never good, which is never good. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we want to make sure that we talk about that because marriage, sure, families are important, and marriage is a union. It is a civil union, and but it is also a civil union that has to be done with the consent of both parties, not because one party wants to do it and another party is forced into doing it.
Yeah, and something that you just kind of reminded me of is Canada and the US, our laws were created under sort of the colonial, Eurocentric, and Christian belief systems of
Absolutely.
colonial settlers. And
Right.
so many sects of Christianity don't believe in divorce. I mean, there's all sorts of things that contribute to the rights and laws that we have
Hmm.
set up as a settler colonial state here in
Right.
Canada and in the United States. And so, yeah, I mean, there's lots of violations of that. I mean, safety, the forced assimilation of Indigenous, folks is definitely a part of our history that we cannot ignore, as you said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk about Article 17. Article 17 says that if you have any personal property, you have the right to own it, and no one can take it away from you without any good reason. And you have the right, if you own property or any sort of personal belongings, or or this word chattel. Chattel means movable property. If you have any of it, you're allowed to share it with whoever you want to. You're allowed to share it with whoever you want to. So this is what that article says. There's plenty of reasons. There's plenty of situations where your property can be taken from you. So, for example, in the United States, you can have your property taken from you in order to satisfy a debt, or
Right.
in order to satisfy, or in the commission of a crime. There are certain pieces of legislation involved with what's called civil asset forfeiture. Civil asset forfeiture, where we talk about where you can have your property taken from you if the property that you obtained was as a result of committing a crime. So those are reasons where your property can be taken away from you. But For example, if you own, there are plenty of examples in the United States and Canada where property has been taken from people simply on the basis of who they are. So, for example, in the Black community, let's talk about um, Black Wall Street, which happened obviously before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's farmland, plenty of farmland has been taken away from Black farmers. There's plenty of examples of businesses being taken away from Black people in the United States simply on the basis of their skin color. So, though that goes against the ideas of this particular article, but I'm sure there's plenty of examples of this in Canada also.
Yeah, when I was reading Article 17 about the right to property, it kind of just made me think about, what prevents people from being able to own property. And my thoughts on that were systemic poverty, wealth inequality, etc., things we've talked about before on this podcast. It comes from a legacy of colonialism that uses Eurocentric ideas of race, gender, sexuality, religion, etc., to create systems of laws and privilege, that privilege white people and the wealthy. And that's so blatant. We've talked about redlining before. We've talked about all the different ways in which wealth inequality privileges, rich people, wealthy people, which are generally white people because of the way that the system, the laws, this colonial legacy we talk about all the time was set up to impoverish people that aren't white.
Right. And it's still going to this day.
Yeah, exactly.
They're still going to this day. It's not just a matter of it being historical, it's also current. So, and we want to make sure that we recognize that.
Yeah.
We want to make sure we recognize that. Article 18 talks about freedom of thought. Basically, Article 18 says you can practice whatever religion you want. You're allowed to think what you want. You're allowed to change your religion if you feel like you want to change your religion. There are certain countries where you are not allowed to think what you want to think because of indoctrination. There are other countries around the world where you are not allowed to change your religion. You are not. There are countries that are monotheistic, where you only pray to one God. And again, the topic of religion is one that we have not explored yet. And I don't know if we will explore it anytime soon, given the amount of episodes we've already got planned, but maybe we'll dig into it later on. But for a state to tell anybody that they cannot practice a particular religion is horrible. It's horrible. And it goes to another one of these rights that we have later on, which is the freedom of expression, which is Article 19, where you can speak up your mind. You can speak freely and share your ideas with yourself and other people. There are countries around the world where you are not allowed to think what you want to think and say what you want to say. Look at the censorship that's taking place around the world right now, where if you do not follow a particular narrative that the tech industry wants you to follow, you will essentially be forced off of social media platforms. That violates Article 19, the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech, the freedom to speak freely.
Yeah.
Take a look. There have been just several months ago, the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, was removed from all forms of social media. It doesn't necessarily matter if you agree with what that person was saying or not. The fact that an organization or a government can tell somebody, no, you can't say that. That's wrong. We should be allowed to speak our minds and speak freely, and then we should be allowed to make the choice of whether we want to listen to what that person has to say or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in regard to the point about freedom of religion, I think what comes to mind is like the Rohingya, for example. They're a small portion of the society that is practicing a different religion from the main country in China, and I mean the folks in Burma and Myanmar as well. I mean, it's horrendous when you're unable to separate church from state
Sure.
because it promotes human rights violations, and sort of the freedom of opinion or expression. I mean, the internet's a wonderful thing and also a horrible thing, and this
Agreed.
sort of made me think about, the internet being a really good tool for exchange of information, very easy exchange of information. But it also makes me think about whistleblowers that we spoke about a couple weeks ago. I mean, they distribute information that people should know about, but they're persecuted for it. And there's many reasons for that, which you can go and listen to that episode if you'd like.
Sure.
But in regards to your example that you used about Trump, I mean, the QAnon conspiracy folks are all wrapped, like Trump is wrapped up in that conspiracy, and that was part of what caused the insurrection on Capitol Hill in January too. So like freedom of opinion and expression has both good and bad, but I agree that we should be able to express ourselves and decide for ourselves like what the right things are,
Sure.
and
Sure.
have discussions about it. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about in the political landscape, especially, for example, on YouTube, there have been plenty of left-leaning political talk shows that have either been demonetized by YouTube or have had their platforms removed from YouTube. This has also happened on the right. Let's take, for instance, somebody like Alex Jones. Alex Jones was removed from all forms of social media. There's been people who, like David Icke, for example, who have been removed from all forms of social media. So it goes both ways regarding the censorship, whether it is from a left-leaning ideology or a right-leaning ideology, or if you don't, or if the message that you share goes against the narrative. For example, let's say you are anti the BDS movement.
Mm-hmm.
That will get you canceled in a few places. If you say something that is adverse to a political party based upon an agenda, that'll get you canceled in some areas. So Ice-T years ago had a line from one of his songs where he said, "It's freedom of speech, but watch what you say."
Mm.
And it shouldn't be that, because you should be allowed to speak your mind freely and not necessarily have to worry about what you're saying. But you do have to understand that if you do say something, someone else has the right to say something back to you.
Yeah, and I think that while it is good to promote freedom of expression, freedom of opinion,
Sure.
I think something to keep in mind in this sort of instance when we're talking about this is, language is powerful and it impacts people. And so when we're talking about this, we're not talking about hate speech. I mean, that should be completely unacceptable. We're talking about having freedom of conversation and expression.
Exactly.
And, you have a personal responsibility to, understand the impact that your words have. And if they're harmful to someone else, you might be removed from a situation, as in the case of Trump, because he was promoting hate. And so, I mean, yeah, I mean, this is an interesting thing to be talking about because there is both sides, and I can see both sides as being valid. But again, there's still some ways in which, it's unacceptable to be impacting other people negatively, in the sense that if you're promoting hate, it's not okay.
Right. Article 20 talks about the right to public assembly. So essentially, you have the right to organize and have peaceful meetings and form groups. And if you don't want to belong to a particular group, no one can force you to belong to that group. Think about how many different ways that right has been violated not only in the United States this past summer and in Canada this past summer, but around the world with all of the different protest movements that have been taking place. People have the right to organize and have peaceful meetings and form groups. If you have the right, one of the rights guaranteed by the First Amendment of the Constitution is the right to peaceably assemble. We have the right as United States citizens to get in a group and protest if we want to, peacefully. There have been plenty of examples where people have done that peacefully, and police has gone ahead and said and instigated situations to make these protests look anything but peaceful, even though the people who were organized in the assembly were organized in a peaceful manner. There's a law that's being crafted right now in England that is preventing people to protest.
Right.
And in Bristol, there's been plenty of action about this bill. There's been what's called the Kill the Bill protests. And the right to protest in the United Kingdom could potentially soon be illegal. That is a violation of people's human rights.
It sure is.
It's a violation of human rights. You should be allowed to protest. If you don't like Boris Johnson, you should be allowed to protest. If you don't like the Tories, you should be allowed to protest. If you don't like Donald Trump, you should be allowed to protest. If you don't like Joe Biden, which I have made perfectly clear that I don't, I should be allowed to protest and not face any of the repercussions of simply on the basis of protesting.
Yeah. This one is also being really challenged in Canada.
Yes.
So there's new laws that came about last year, or I guess not new laws, but new bills that are challenging this in Canada. So basically what's happened is last year, once the pandemic restrictions were put into place, Alberta, the place that I am from, took that as an opportunity to use the inability, because of the state of emergency, they used the inability of folks to assemble in groups of more than 15 people to implement less tolerance for civil disobedience, because there was a bunch of protests last year against pipelines. So in February 2020, they introduced legislation imposing stiff fines and possible jail terms for protesters who damage or even interfere with the operation of a wide range of energy infrastructure, i.e. pipelines, railway blockades, etc. Although such acts are illegal, it has also threatened the same for animal rights protesters in agricultural facilities. That's from Bob Weber in the Calgary Herald, and that was published in May 2020. So basically all of this kind of came out in May after the restrictions had been imposed. And there's another article I wanted to just read an excerpt of. So in May 2020, this article by Chloe Alexander and Anna Stanley in The Thai said this: using executive powers granted under a provincial state of public health emergency, which is what happened because of COVID-19 last year, Alberta, under the Premier Jason Kenney, is swiftly dismantling legislative, regulatory, and financial barriers to oil sands development and pushing through the construction of controversial oil pipelines. This comes at a time when dissent has effectively been silenced. People are preoccupied with survival, discouraged from leaving their homes, and banned from gathering in groups. Demonstrations are not only impossible, they are forbidden by law. This is a textbook example of what Naomi Klein calls disaster capitalism, using a crisis when the normal rules of democratic procedure are suspended to push through a series of reforms that would otherwise be resisted and opposed. Now, this all happened last spring, just after the COVID-19 restrictions were put in place. And then in November of last year, there was a bunch of railway blockades in other provinces, primarily in Ontario, BC, and some in Quebec. And they were also protesting, oil infrastructure and oil pipeline building, and they blocked the railways because that's a major way that Canada moves oil or bitumen. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been intensifying, and the government is using the pandemic as an excuse to basically not allow protests anymore. And this is a really scary thing because, it's spring now, we're ramping up. We being, those of us who are, protesting and fighting for civil justice, for social justice. And so, yeah, it's scary to be living in this time because these state of emergencies do pretty much allow governments to have martial law. So,
and we've seen that, for example, in Hungary, where Viktor Orban essentially signed a decree where he gets to rule by fiat as a result of the state of emergency in Hungary. So take a look at the situation in Belarus with Lukashenko and how he's tried to suppress protests. Take a look at the protests taking place in Myanmar, where the government is shooting at and killing their own citizens. Yeah. So there's large swaths of the world that are going against the concepts and ideas of having a protest, and not being able to protest is fundamentally anti-democratic. And Article 21 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights essentially says that everybody has the right to a democracy. Everybody has the right to participate in his or her own government. You have the right to be allowed to vote. And when you vote, your vote for whoever you vote for should be private. No one else needs to know who you voted for. And every vote should have the same representative value. So your vote should be just as equal as my vote. And government should vote on representatives, and these votes should be made public, or at least the voting process should be made public, and it should be done on a regular basis. And lastly, the idea of voting means that you should have people from your constituency that are elected to represent your constituency. Think about how many different ways we've seen this particular human right violated. There are countries around the world, there are some countries in the world where women are not allowed to vote. Take a look at voter suppression laws in the United States. It was just a week or two ago, a Georgia state representative by the name of Park Cannon tried to knock on the door of Georgia's governor, Brian Kemp, to watch a voter suppression law be signed into law. And Park Cannon was subsequently arrested for merely doing her job. And this is in Georgia, and if you read some of the ways that this new voting law in Georgia is set up, it's essentially voter suppression. Take a look at the history of gerrymandering in the United States. Take a look at the United States not passing the Voting Rights Act. Mm-hmm. So there are plenty of ways where the right to democracy has not been enforced. The Electoral College, the way the Electoral College is set up, and we did an entire episode about voting in the Joe and Kat Chats podcast series, where we talked about the Electoral College and how it's related to slavery, and making sure that Southern states had more representation than Northern states, and the 3/5 compromise. Just go ahead and listen to the episode. There's a lot to it. And how certain people in the United States, based upon their skin color or gender or age, were not allowed to vote. So everybody should be allowed to vote. You should be allowed to have people represent you from your constituency, whether it's a local or a municipal situation, a state, or a country. And every vote should have the same value. Well, with your Electoral College, you not only have delegates, but you have superdelegates, and superdelegates greatly overrepresent the amount of people that a delegate represents. So a delegate might represent a particular group of people, but a superdelegate has more voting power or more voting value than a delegate, which goes against this entire right to democracy. Yeah. Additionally, the right to this right to democracy. Additionally, in the United States, quite frankly, there's really only two parties that really are truly allowed to vote. We're truly allowed to vote for, even though there's various other parties that don't necessarily get the same level of representation that other parties do. Everybody should be allowed to vote, and everybody should be allowed to vote freely and equally.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. And you outlined very well how that's being violated in various ways. And like you said, we've talked about it before. So
yep, we talked about it. We have about 15 minutes left, and we have about 9 articles to go. So we're going to pick up the pace a little bit. Yeah. Article 22 talks about Social Security. Everybody has the right to have their government take care of you. So you're allowed to have benefits for housing and medicine and education and childcare, and benefits for senior citizens. We have that in the United States. It's called Social Security. We have health care for old people. It's called Medicare. We have health care for those who do not, or low wage earners, or are unable to make any sort of income, or those who are unable to take care of themselves. It's called Medicaid. So there are certain social systems the United States has to take care of its citizens, but there are other countries that have more robust social systems than the United States. Canada is certainly one of them. Everybody in Canada has healthcare. Everybody in the United States does not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, our social services are a little bit more robust, like you said, but there's definitely room to grow. I mean, one thing that comes to mind in this conversation is the amount of money that people with disabilities have, or have access to, I should say. It's well below the poverty line. And so many people with disabilities who are unable to work really just live in horrendous poverty. And that's something that is a huge problem in Canada right now, which leads us to Article 23, which is everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment.
Correct. It also gives you the right to have a job. It also gives you the right to have a fair wage without any sort of discrimination. And it also allows you the right to unionize. Take a look at how many different pieces of legislation, most notably the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 and NAFTA, which essentially destroyed the rights for workers to unionize or act collectively or collectively bargain.
Yeah.
And take a look at the situation with Amazon in Bessemer, Alabama, where the Amazon workers there are trying to unionize. They're trying to make sure that their rights are protected. So any efforts that are anti-union or to engage in what is called union busting is a violation of human rights. And if you want to learn more about unions and employment, of course, Kat and I, we did an entire episode called Employment. So go ahead, listen to that episode. We talked about the various types of workers, in the various types of what's called collective action. For example, sit-ins, picket lines, strikes, wildcat strikes, etc. There's a bunch of information in the employment episode if you want to learn more about the collective action. And just as much as we have the right to work, we have the right to relax and chill out, which is Article 24. We have the right to relax and take time off of work, and we have the right to have paid time off of work. And working hours, limits on working hours. In some countries, your working hours are 40 hours per week. In other countries, for example, in France, I think it is 37 hours a week as mandated by law. So some countries have more working hours than others. The United States is 40. I think in Canada, it's also 40, or is it 35?
Yeah.
It's 40?
It's 40, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have the right to take it easy. And when we have that right to take it easy, we also have the right to take care of ourselves or have personal care, which is Article 25. We have the right to, quite honestly, a decent life. We have the right to make sure that we have enough food, clothing, housing, and of course, healthcare. And if you're sick or elderly or disabled or widowed, or you can't earn a living for reasons outside of your control, the government should help you. And if you're a mother and you're about to give birth, the mothers who are about to give birth should get extra help. And the children of those mothers will be getting the same types of protections as their mothers. Think about how, and again, I mentioned one key word in that: healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in the United States does not have healthcare. And when people say healthcare is a human right, this is what they're referring to. They're referring to Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because healthcare is a human right. You are supposed to have healthcare. You're supposed to have it. And take a look at something else listen to what I said earlier, when I said that if you're out of work, sick, old, disabled, widowed, or cannot earn a living for reasons outside of your control, I would certainly think that a pandemic, a once in a century pandemic, is a reason outside of people's control. And the government should be doing everything possible to help. And it didn't say that the government should be helping corporations and giving a small amount of help to businesses. I'm sorry, to individuals. It should be the other way around, because this is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is not the Universal Declaration of corporate interests. I'm going to say that again.
Yes.
This is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is not the Universal Declaration of corporate interests. So the government should be doing more to help its citizenry. For example, giving everybody Medicare for all, giving everybody a living wage. When the United States federal government most recently passed the American Rescue Act, the $15 minimum wage was excluded from the bill. Not only should the $15 minimum wage been included in the bill, but the minimum wage should be much more than $15.
Yes.
But again, there's a lot of people who are now unable to earn a living for reasons outside of their control because a pandemic decided that everybody should be out of jobs for a particular period of time. The government should be doing more to help.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, this is bringing up a lot of things that I could talk about here, but we are running out of time, unfortunately. So I will just say that Articles 22 through 25, I think the main thing that I want to highlight, I guess, is just the right to unionize. We need a massive strike. We need a massive movement to unionize workers, because workers are being extraordinarily exploited right now in both Canada and the United States.
And around the world.
And around the world, you're right. Yeah. And so we need to bolster social services and coverages for those who can't work, because these things happen. I saw a tweet recently, and I can't remember who it was, but I think it was posted by one of the disabilities activists that I follow, and it said something along the lines of, at one point in your life, in everyone's life, there's going to be a point where you are disabled in one way or another, whether it's through aging, or an accident, or breaking your wrist or your foot or whatever. There's a point in everyone's life where you're going to be disabled or know somebody who is disabled. And so disability rights always seem to be shoved to the side when we're talking about activist stuff, but it really just doesn't need to be shoved to the side anymore. Like this is something that impacts everyone at some point. And so it needs to be at the forefront.
Absolutely. And one of the future episodes that we're going to do is called Housing and the Unhoused. And when people say that housing is a human right, it's also coming from Article 25, because everybody has the right to housing.
Yeah.
Everybody has that right. Article 26 talks about education. Everybody, in terms of primary school, primary education should be free, and parents can choose what a child learns. And additionally, everybody should be taught basic human values of respect and tolerance for each other. So Article 25, again, is it's about education, and we should be taught how to interact with other people, regardless of their race or their nationality or their ethnicity or their religion.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone that comes to mind who is, an advocate for the education of women and girls is Malala, who we spoke about a few weeks ago on one of the episodes that we had. And so I mean, this is just being violated all around the world. I mean, basic education is, something that, most people have access to in Canada and the United States. The quality of it is questionable. But another thing that comes up I think about the right to access to education is financial barriers, because holy moly is secondary education, or post-secondary education, sorry, very expensive in both Canada and beyond expensive in the United States.
Absolutely. 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 Article 27 talks about copyright protections, where if you are a creator of a particular art form, you have the right to have that particular artistic effort protected by law. And if you created that particular piece of art, you should be able to benefit from that art. So that's
Yeah,
copyright protection.
just to clarify, it says creator of any scientific, literary, or artistic production. So it encompasses quite a lot of everything in our
True.
society.
True. True. Article 28 is the right to a fair and free world. You should be
Mm.
able to live in a peaceful and orderly society. And you should be living in a place where the rights and freedoms of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights can be protected.
Yeah, exactly.
Can be protected. And that's Article 28. We are almost at the finish line. We have two more articles. Article 29 talks about responsibility, where it says that we have the right and the duty to protect other people's rights and freedoms, and each country's laws should guarantee human rights and allow for mutual respect.
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of instances where my country and your country do not guarantee human rights. They don't guarantee human rights, and not only human rights for their citizens, but human rights for other human beings. Take a look at the situation taking place along the border of the United States. There's nothing humane about having unaccompanied minors in cages.
Or
Nothing.
separating families.
Or separating them from families. Exactly. And that doesn't matter. And it's thoroughly irrelevant which political party was separating children from their parents. It doesn't matter if it was the Trump regime or the Biden presidency. It doesn't matter. Inhumane treatment is inhumane treatment regardless of political party. And those children being locked up in cages is a violation of a human right. You're
Yeah.
supposed to be making sure that you protect other people's rights and freedoms. If you hold somebody in a detention center or 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 a migrant facility or a concentration camp against their will, and nobody would go there on their own volition anyway, so it obviously is going to be against their will. That is a violation of their human rights. And
Yeah.
if you do not give them the protections that they need so they can eventually transition into a new country, that is a violation of human rights. And Article 30, as we wrap this up, it says that no one can take away your human rights. Nobody can, whether it's a government, a particular political group, or an individual. No one can take away your human rights.
Yeah.
You are allowed to have them because you're a human being.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that the point of this, outlining the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for me, and I think probably it applies to you too, Joe, is just that
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to highlight the fact that human rights encompass a lot more than what our state, as the government of Canada and the government of the United States and all the governments across the world are actually providing and upholding for us. And so by highlighting this, document, I think it just allows us to talk about and understand in a broader way, like what we should be protected or how we should be protected as human beings, because these rights are for us as humans just because we are alive.
Exactly. And it's interesting how, and we got about 30 seconds left. It's interesting that we live on a planet or in a planet where we have to have a document to tell us what rights we should have as human beings. But because humanity has treated each other human beings so terribly over not only centuries, but quite honestly, eons, we needed some sort of document to refer to. So
Yeah.
that is a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Kat, always a pleasure to be with you. Looking forward to next week. And we've got to go soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And, thank you for listening, everybody. Take care of yourselves.
All right. Peace.
Peace.